This is Toledo Symphony Lab, a behind-the-scenes look at the world of classical music from WGTE Public Media and your Toledo Symphony. I'm Brad Cresswell. Joining me are the Toledo Symphony's president and CEO Zach Vassar, principal second violin and artistic administrator Merwin Sue, and we have a special guest with us today. That is Bob Bell, who is president emeritus of the Toledo Symphony. Welcome to you, Bob.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today, the episode is entitled All About André. We're going to be talking about André Watts, who is making a return appearance this weekend with the Toledo Symphony. The concert is happening at 8 o'clock p.m. this Friday and Saturday, February 1st and 2nd. This is at the Toledo Museum of Art Paris style. Elaine Trudel conducting the Toledo Symphony. We're going to hear that wonderful piano concerto by Edvard Grieg that everybody knows and loves. We'll also hear the Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 6, the Pathétique. This is really a powerhouse program, I have to say. And beginning with the Hebrides Overture by Felix Mendelssohn. And there is an interesting story behind the selection of that. Merwin, why don't you tell us about it?
Absolutely. I think we really wanted to include the audience in the programming of the series, and Alain chose 4 overtures that he felt would begin this powerhouse program effectively. Beethoven's Egmont Overture, Weber's Der Freischütz Overture, Verdi's La Forza del Destino Overture, and Mendelssohn's Hebrides. And we closed the voting, and it was a tie.
And how did you pick the contenders?
These were Alain's choices. We needed something that didn't have, say, 7 bagpipes or a dangling accordion or something. Something that, fit the instrumentation.
Me, a dangling accordion.
It's like when you finish the sentence with a preposition.
Like exactly. A participle, something like that.
Yeah,
a dangling accordion.
Where did you put the
They're
accordion?
all the rage in Canada.
So this was an audience choice.
It was an audience choice. Hebrides and Forza del Destino was a photo finish. So via social media, we extended the vote, I think another 24 hours, and some devoted Mendelssohnians pulled the Hebrides Overture across the finish line.
Can I tell you a secret if you promise not to tell anybody?
You are on the radio, I just want to point out.
You voted?
I know. I did vote. I voted for the Hebrides. So I think it was my vote that actually put it over the top.
That's amazing.
How many times did you vote for the Hebrides?
I don't remember.
Vote early and vote
So,
often.
do you intend to attend the concert, Brad?
I will attend the concert if you can remember my name. That's okay.
I got it. Yes, sir, Brad.
I understand. Your name is
knighted.
Bob. My name is Brad. Okay. There's not enough coffee in the world, shall we say, to activate the brain. Today.
I think there's actually something that happens when somebody misspeaks their own name. That's a strike against you, sir.
But I not only misspeak it, I have often misspelled my name as Bard instead of Brad and not realized it until later.
Well, it's poetic.
You mean as in Bart Simpson?
Similar to that, only with a D, as in Shakespeare. Bard Shakespeare.
Okay.
And
his name was William.
Yeah, somehow I did that with the communications between my daughter's school and myself, so I keep getting these emails about my daughter's grades addressed to Bard.
Should be the Bard.
Yeah. But we digress. So the Hebrides Overture, opening the program. And then, of course, the star of the evening is André Watts, returning after a 15-year absence. Now, before we start talking about André and talking about the Grieg Piano Concerto and all of that, I have a little André Watts quiz to test our knowledge of this remarkable artist and also to sort of acquaint our listeners with André Watts if they don't know him. I mean, he hasn't been here in 15 years, so, maybe he's been off the local radar for a while.
I really hope we aren't going to humiliate him with a quiz, though. I mean, he is one of the greatest pianists living today.
Absolutely, and the quiz speaks to that.
Okay.
This is not a silly quiz.
Okay.
Well, with that in mind, let me pull up a little music here for us.
Ooh, it is a little Grieg.
Yeah. Little Edvard Grieg there in the background.
Right.
Hall of the Mountain King. Nice quiz music. André Watts was born in, was it Germany, France, or the United States?
Germany.
Yay!
I have a feeling Bob's going to know the answer to all of these.
I think
Better
he will.
recede into the background very soon.
He was born in Germany. His father was an African-American soldier, Herman Watts, who was stationed in Germany. And his mother was a Hungarian refugee who played the piano. Her name was Maria Alexandra Gusmitz. When he was 8 years old, he moved to what city in the United States? Was it New York, Philadelphia or San Francisco?
I have Philadelphia in the brain.
Me too.
There was Philadelphia when he was 8 years old. The first instrument he played, however, before they moved to Philadelphia was...
A dangling accordion.
Exactly. When he was 4 years old, did he start out on the piano? It could be a trick question. The clarinet or the violin?
How many 4-year-old clarinetists are
The violin.
Yeah, I would go for violin.
Yes, the violin. Boy,
Now
you guys are 3 for 3 right now.
I want to hear a 4-year-old clarinetist. That would be really difficult.
You start out on the kazoo and then we
Yeah.
move him over to clarinet.
Absolutely.
Okay, number 4. André Watts studied the piano with his mother, who held up what famous composer/pianist as a role model for his practicing aesthetic, if that makes sense. Was it Franz Liszt, Frédéric Chopin, or Ludwig van Beethoven?
That would be Liszt.
Franz Liszt. Don't forget his mother was Hungarian,
Yes.
as
there you
was
go.
Franz Liszt. Number 5. André Watts won his first important competition when he was it age 5, age 9, or age 11?
I feel like this hinges on the definition of important.
It wasn't, the local neighborhood
Well, I
competition.
think he was 16 when he made his
yeah.
New York Philharmonic
But before that,
premiere, so
when he played in Philadelphia, he won an important contest. Was he 5 years old, 9 years old? You have a 1 in 3 chance here. 5 years old, 9 years old, or 11 years old.
I'm going to go for 9.
Nice.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's right. I hit the wrong button. Yes.
Did you get decaf coffee today, Brad? Was that the problem?
No.
Should I consider that maybe some of my previous strikes have actually been correct?
No.
In all the quizzes that I've lost.
No. This is not like where, the prosecutor gets in trouble and then you have to reopen all of his cases, right?
Sure about that?
Yeah. It's my quiz. I'm sure about it. So he was 9 years old when he won a competition to perform in one of the Philadelphia Orchestra's children's concerts. But, and you mentioned, when he was 16, he also won another competition to make his debut with, was it A, the Philadelphia Orchestra under Ormandy, B, the New York Phil under Bernstein, or C, Chicago Symphony under Reiner?
B.
B for Bernstein.
It was a Young People's as well. And I just watched the video of it, and I can't remember the exact quote, but Bernstein comes out and he says something like, I have the distinct privilege to perform with Mr. Watts.
Yeah.
And you think about the 16-year-old pianist.
Pretty
That's
fantastic.
pretty high praise.
Exactly. So after that Young People's concert, Leonard Bernstein hired André Watts to fill in for what famous pianist, which helped to solidify his career? Was it Glenn Gould, was it Leon Fleischer, or was it Leonard Bernstein? Who did he hire to fill in?
That would be Gould.
Glenn Gould.
It was just
Wow.
a couple weeks after the Young People's, and I think he played the Liszt
did
first
play the
concerto
Liszt.
both times.
Yeah,
did
you've
play
really done
twice.
your research here, Zach. That's good. His first album, with Bernstein and the New York Phil, came out when he was 17. It was a Grammy Award winner for Best New Classical Artist. André Watts played a piano concerto by what composer on that? I'm not even going to give you the choices. Just tell me.
It was Liszt, wasn't it?
It was Franz Liszt, Piano Concerto No. 1. That album had somewhat of a slightly superlative title, which was it The Fantastic Mr. Watts? Was it The Exciting Debut of André Watts? Or was it Introducing André? Which one of those three was the title of his first album when he was 17?
I feel like it's B. I'm going to go for B.
The Exciting Debut of André Watts. Okay, final question. We made it. You guys have got like a perfect record here.
Okay.
Way to jinx us.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to...
Except for the one I counted wrong, which was actually right.
Don't forget it.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. No pressure. Which of the following concertos did André Watts wait to start performing until he was in his 50s? Was it Rachmaninoff No. 3? Was it Tchaikovsky No. 1? Or was it the Grieg
It's
Piano
the Grieg.
Concerto?
It's the Grieg.
The Grieg Piano Concerto. Yeah. I read an interesting interview with him not too long ago where he talked about the fact that he held off on that because it was, so popular and had been done by so many different pianists. He wanted to make it fresh. The only way he could do that was by, taking his time. Should we all have such patience? Right?
It says a lot about an artist that they're willing to wait, to make sure they have something to say about it.
Yeah.
I think we've all heard a recording that we wish probably hadn't been made, something that didn't really say anything new. So that's kind of refreshing.
Yeah. Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experiences with André Watts? Because he's been here several times, but hasn't been here for a while.
Right. He came in 1970, right, Zach, for the first time with Serge Fournier. And he was fairly young at that time. And I think that's something that the Toledo Symphony has always had a reputation for, identifying emerging artists at the beginning of their career when they're more or less affordable. And later on, it changes. However...
But we do create long relationships with these folks,
right,
and I think André Watts is a really good example of that.
But André has always been a good person to work with, and his manager, his agent, Linda Martyr, is one of the classiest people in the business and very easy to work with. And I know Zach has had recent experience with her.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, she'll be coming for the concert.
Tell us how this came about, because... has André Watts been on your radar since you came here? Or?
Absolutely. He's been. I'm a big André Watts fan. So I remember I was a kid. My sister was living in Chicago, and she knew I loved André Watts because I think I had that debut album. I couldn't remember the name of it though. But she got me tickets to see him perform with the Chicago Symphony, and they did the Tchaikovsky first. So all the way back, I've really loved this guy, and I remember seeing him in Toledo in the late '90s with Andrew Massey. And when we went into this 75th anniversary year, we really wanted to have kind of a great returning artist, a high caliber performer who'd been here before, and we looked at a bunch of different options, and we kept going back to André Watts because he is the only soloist to perform with every music director going back to Serge Fournier. So this will be his 8th performance in Toledo, which says a lot. But that doesn't mean that he's been here every 3 years. It's been 15 years since he's been at the Peristyle. So, and if you look at the concerti that he's brought here, that 1970 debut that Bob was talking about was the Brahms Second Concerto. So for a young kid, it's a meaty concerto to come with. Yeah. He did Beethoven 4, he did Beethoven 5, he did Liszt Second, the Tchaik 1 with Fournier again on the same program as a Rachmaninoff concerto. He did Brahms with Massey. That's the concert I remember in '98. And then he was last here in 2004 with Stefan Sanderling to perform Mozart. Yeah. So that's like the entire catalog of great concerti as far as I'm concerned. And to add Grieg to it, it just made so much sense.
It's a wide-ranging repertoire, but all of them have something in common. They're all somewhat serious, really important concert works for the piano. And the interviews that I've read with him, he seems to be a very serious artist in the sense that he really wants to find the core of what the composer was creating in that work. When he was talking about the Grieg piano concerto, he talked about a lot of other pianists kind of over-romanticizing the piece. And for people who are not familiar with it, let me play just a little bit of the first movement. I don't know that... here we go. Now, everybody knows that famous opening, right? It sort of has a little bit of a Gothic feel to it, and I think a lot of those feelings have been sort of impressed upon it.
Yeah, it even
since it was written.
Even makes a strange appearance in How to Succeed at Business Without Really Trying.
You're talking about the stage, the musical?
That moment, yeah, it shows up in the score.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. But everybody knows this concerto, and getting back to the interview I read with André Watts, he talked about how a lot of it is taken for granted. A lot of pianists have sort of been a little, perhaps, more indulgent than others, and his idea was to try to get back to basics. Play things in the tempo that the composer wrote, play things without as much rubato, say, and in your experience in hearing him or working with him, would you agree with that idea that's the sort of thing that he seems to go for in his performances?
I wonder if Merwin wouldn't have a great perspective on that because he sits right next to him during the performance.
Often that's a very intimidating but very exciting place to be, I think, when you're watching a great artist like that. I think one thing that's really impressive when you're listening to André Watts on recording is there's this robustness and power power and the sound, but when you're watching him perform, the power doesn't come from like these grand gestures moving all over it's very contained. You have this sense of immense power, but it's all very marshaled.
Yeah.
And I think that with the Grieg piano concerto, that should really serve him extraordinarily in good stead. I think it's an A minor concerto, very much in the tradition of the Schumann A minor concerto. And I think that a lot of times, as you mentioned, kind of the Gothic associations of that key really kind of overwhelm the entire performance. But I think Mr. Watts talks about how harmonically inventive Grieg is, and that he takes us into surprising keys. And I'm really excited to see how he does that, as opposed to making it all this one giant, dark A minor palette.
But I'm really curious about this idea of you sitting next to him in the performance. Can you sort of describe the physical layout of how that works?
And this might actually change because of the way Alain Trudel likes to set up the orchestra with the first violins and the second violins opposite each other. But typically, with the first violins and the second violins next to each other, the front stand of second violins is basically right alongside the keyboard, and we really get an amazing view. And it's one of the times when there's an orchestra kind of a break in the orchestral tutti, you have to be really careful not to completely lose track of where you are in your part and just
that's
get
what I was
lost
wondering.
in the piano playing.
Well, just be happy they don't ask you to turn pages while you're there.
That has happened, and it's not a good
Really?
idea.
I can imagine. Now, Bob, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and see if maybe you had some fun stories that you can or cannot tell about André and his experience with Toledo.
Well, I certainly, he's had a number of interesting experiences in Toledo. He's made some terrific friendships here, lifelong ones, actually.
Yeah.
However, one of the more sad memories I have, it's not necessarily sad, but I went to New York when in the early days when I was president of the orchestra, and he had invited me with his companion, who was from Toledo, and they were together for quite a number of years, to dinner. And unfortunately, I had stopped at a street stand because I was hungry and had some sort of a sandwich, which was devastating. And
the sandwich was devastating, or the fact
I
that
was.
you had
I mean, I was. So, and poor André said, "Well, but we got a salmon for you." I was unable to walk. I mean, so
Can I just say that would not have stopped me?
well, I don't want to talk about the restrooms at Lincoln Center. Or at least the sinks, that is.
Speaking of
the sinks.
devastating,
The
yeah.
sinks.
Especially back, what decade was this?
Yeah.
Back
This
in the
was
90s
in
or 80s, yeah.
Oh, so anyway.
So your dinner with André was not the same as my dinner with André.
or was that?
Your lack
That's
of
right.
dinner.
That was a
with
great
André.
film, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised Zach didn't pull that.
That's
quote.
all right.
Right.
I was stuck on Lincoln Center. One of my very happy moments in coming to the orchestra is that there's a painting on the wall of the president's office of André Watts playing the piano at the peristyle.
Interesting. Yes.
And I know it is yours, Bob, and it's been there for a number of years, and I admired it when it was in your office and when it was Kathy's office, and I was happy that you allowed me to keep it on the wall there on a temporary loan. But do you want to talk a little bit about the background there?
Well, thanks. I was actually going to bring that up
Okay.
to say that you had that, and it was most appropriate because of all the things you just said about your admiration for André and so forth. It was painted by Linda Amesbell, who was a professor of art at the museum, who did a number of portraits of André, and I think André Watts. And
Just
I think
don't call him
has,
Brian.
Right. I think André himself may have one, but I would be reluctant to have asked him that on the interview today, just in case.
Sure.
But Linda came to the peristyle for rehearsals, and matter of fact, it happened over more than one season. I mean, because he was here consecutively early on a couple of times, and she would come and sketch at the peristyle, and then go back and then created this particular painting that Zach has in his office, which I've heard a number of people talk about as a fine example of her work. And actually, she is the one who has said it's okay to stay there.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you to her.
I want to get a little bit into the actual logistics of the concert, and I know a lot of people that are going to be showing up to see this are going to be there, obviously, to see André Watts. I mean, it's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for a lot of folks.
I think a lot of us are seeing this as an occasion to celebrate many things: the history of the orchestra, our 75th anniversary, the leadership we have in our trustees, museums excited that André Watts will be coming back to the Peristyle. So I think, within this world of classical music, which is a small world, we're all very excited this week, and I don't want to just say that it's simply the Grieg piano concerto we're excited about. Let's not forget that Alain Trudel has brought us the Tchaikovsky 6. It was his last guest performance where he played the Tchaikovsky 4th, which is the theme song for this program.
Yeah.
And I remember his Tchaikovsky was very forceful, very beautiful. It radiated off the stage, and I'm very excited to see what he brings to that.
Well, we've pivoted a little bit here to Tchaikovsky. Do we want to talk about that particular piece for people that may not be familiar with it? It's also known as the Pathétique Symphony, right? I'm looking at you, Merwin.
That is one of those things that really just doesn't translate well in program notes.
Yes.
You can't just go,
not the pathetic.
Pathetic.
Right.
It doesn't really work as well. I think.
Well, describe how it does work. What does it mean?
Well, I think it maybe the word that better applies is pathos, and this sense of mourning and the sense of loss. It's a very unconventional symphony for Tchaikovsky. It begins very, very slowly, and the first movement never really kind of settles into a typical allegro that Tchaikovsky would launch. And then there's a beautiful waltz movement, but that's totally wrong. It's not actually in 3/4, it's in 5/4, and yet it just has the same dance-like character that Tchaikovsky's waltzes have, and it's one of my favorite movements to perform. There's a real ease to that movement, which completely sets every other movement apart, because that second movement, I think the movement that's probably talked about the least, just has this cheerfulness and this joy and this grace that I just love performing that movement. And then the third movement is an exciting, invigorating march that it's almost impossible not to applaud at the end of that march, even if you know there's a finale coming. And I would just personally like to say that I don't judge anybody who does. I don't want to speak as an organization or as for my fellow musicians, but I also have that urge when I'm listening to that piece.
Well, we have an opportunity here because we can gauge how many people actually heard this podcast by how many people applaud now after the march in your performance. I'll listen for that in the recording of it.
But in that final movement, it feels like Tchaikovsky allows his emotions to, pour forward in this incredible melancholic canvas. And he doesn't do that very often. We just came off performing a Tchaikovsky piano trio, and he does that in that elegiac movement as well. But it's usually something that he kind of keeps more under wraps. And in the last movement of the Pathétique Symphony, I feel like there's a dam that breaks a little bit, and it's very vulnerable music. And I think it's a really interesting experience to sit in the hall after this adrenaline-filled march and then to watch a composer lay himself bare.
This is one that I feel is perhaps the romantic symphony. Simply, on one level, you take apart the standard sonata form of a typical symphony in some of the issues that Merwin just mentioned about the dance. It's not really a waltz. The fanfare in the third movement, the slow movement at the fourth movement, the kind of wandering first movement. But it's high drama. The whole symphony sets up as high drama. At many points, it's terrifying, and it's ferocious music. There's a point about 9 or 10 minutes into the first movement where the wave crests, and that's some of the most intense music I can think of. The third movement, the march, Herbert von Karajan's daughter said she had the misfortune of watching her father rehearse that movement with the Berlin Philharmonic once, and she was afraid of her dad in that moment because he could get that many people to make that kind of a sound. You think about that, right? And then the fourth movement, I agree with your comments, Merwin. It's not gushing in sentimentality, but the floodgates are open with a sense of prolonged sorrow. And we think about this with the lens of Tchaikovsky being suicidal at this point in his life, and this being his last great composition. It is his farewell to music, and I don't think I would change a note.
I would just say that on the wandering aspect of the first movement that both Merwin and Zach have spoken about, I would say, however, probably the most incomparably beautiful melodies exist here, more than any other of his symphonies.
It's in some ways his most modern. I mean, you think about he's playing with a form, but he's mastered it. Right. We've all heard music that wanders that we wish it didn't. I simply use that adjective because it is formless, but it is full of melody.
Yeah,
it is.
I had a professor in college once say that Tchaikovsky couldn't do transitions. He would have this shape, and then he would move it to this shape, and there was no transition in between. But it was all very tuneful, and you could enjoy it. And I think by the Sixth Symphony, he had found his way around that.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about sounds like his ballets, the scenic kind of formula.
Right. Yeah.
The Symphony No. 6 is a far cry from the Nutcracker.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
Although it might be interesting for you to make a cameo as Mother Ginger in the Pathetique Symphony. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, but it would be like this sort of like sad clown.
Oh no, that was a good one.
Yeah.
That one deserves a little applause. Good one. Well, we're running out of time. I wonder if anybody wants to take the last word. We haven't really talked a whole lot about the Grieg Piano Concerto itself. We talked a lot about André Watts, who's going to be back here, but does anybody have anything they want to say about the concert? When it was done in Toledo last?
I believe Cornelia Herrmann.
Yeah.
She's a German-Japanese pianist who also played it very beautifully. I think it was a very refined performance. I think I'm anticipating maybe a greater sense of power in this performance.
Yeah.
And so you weren't distracted watching the keyboard during that performance.
I do remember the concerto, so that's a good start.
So I'll tell you about this performance that you just brought up. So I've never seen the Grieg performed live, and that was to be the first. And I was quite excited, and you kind of look through, so I keep records on these things, of course. Strange enough to do that. I got through the first 3 minutes of the first movement, and then I had a magnificent coughing fit.
Oh, no.
So I ran out to the peristyle lobby, and I ended up listening to the entire concerto through the doors. Very sad.
How awful.
Stay healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this will, again, I hope this weekend be the first time I see the Grieg concerto.
So in your records, have you seen the Grieg half the time?
It says abbreviated.
To be continued. This is what it says. Well, if anybody sees Zach, at the concert, please give him a cough drop just in case. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in today and joining us, especially our special guest, Bob Bell, President Emeritus of the Toledo Symphony Orchestra. Also, thanks to Zach Vassar and Merwin Siu. This program is a production of WGTE Public Media in collaboration with our sponsor, the Toledo Symphony. You can download episodes of this program as a podcast by going to our website at wgte.org/lab. You can also subscribe to us through your podcast app of choice, including Apple and Google Podcasts. I'm Brad Cresswell, and you've been listening to Toledo Symphony Lab on FM 91.